Welcome to Israel Update. I'm Gadi Taub in Tel Aviv, and Mike is no longer in the United Kingdom. Mike Doran of the Hudson Institute. Shalom.
Shalom, Gadi. How are you?
And you no longer have your mother-in-law's Christmas tree, but you now have an American flag behind you.
Yeah, I do. Things were looking very bland behind me, and so I thought I'd spice it up with a little patriotism.
Yeah, and you don't have another Ben Gurion. So, or what would you choose if you had to choose an American politician for the other side? Am I putting you on the spot here? Is this something?
Oh no, that's easy. That's easy. Oh yeah,
the lion, Andrew Jackson.
Andrew Jackson. Yeah, absolutely.
I guess.
But but people get upset by him, so I don't. But if I had to, I thought I thought you were gonna really test me
on Ben Gurion.
Yeah, because I have two heroes, two foreign heroes.
Ben Gurion and Churchill.
Ataturk.
Ataturk. Oh, I should have guessed that.
Yeah.
I hope
I love that. I love Ataturk.
I hope you don't mention this when you speak with Erdogan.
I won't. Do you know? I've met President Erdogan a couple of times, and one time I put him in the same company with Netanyahu, and he didn't like it.
I wonder why.
He asked me. He asked me. It was just before one of your interminable, one of the innumerable elections that you recently had.
Yeah.
And he asked me who was going to win, and I said, Mr. President, there are two politicians in this part of the world that I never count out. One of them is Benjamin Netanyahu, and the other one is you. And he said, "Oh, please don't put me in that company."
That was in the heyday of their honeymoon. Now things are much, much worse since the war in Gaza.
That was actually, that was before the honeymoon. I feel comfortable saying it now because, I mean, he's not really hiding that publicly. So I don't think this will make any news anywhere. What is that you're holding in your lap? Some kind of animal.
This is, there is no way to explain to a cat that you're doing a podcast. If I lock her in the room, she screams. If I let her go, she comes to see who I'm talking to. And so,
are you sure that's a cat? It looks a little bit too big to be a cat.
It's actually a small cat, but it has the character of a Tasmanian devil. So what do we have today on Israel, which is the subject of our show? So this is one of the rare instances where we know what the episode will be called before we recorded it. And we're going to call it The Bind, because our central subject would be the contradicting pressures on the Netanyahu coalition and to what extent they can stand them. But we'll also be talking about Operation Prosperity Guardian, which the United States initiate in order to restrain the Houthis, or rather, what would you call it, Mike? To prevent the Houthis from blocking the entrance to the Red Sea. And then we'll have the dumbest take on the news, or the funniest take on the news, or the most regrettable take on the news, whichever one you like best. But first, Mike, the headlines.
So, Gandhi, fighting is continuing in the Gaza Strip, but there's really not that much to report about the fighting. I think there are three main issues that we want to highlight here. One of them is that there's a hostage deal in the works. Israel is reportedly agreeing to release 40 hostages, and in return, there will be another pause in the fighting and some humanitarian assistance. Israel insists that the talks should take place, the negotiations should take place while the fighting continues, and that the deal should be over the release of women and children who are still being held in Gaza. These reports are coming after David Barnea, the Mossad director, met in Warsaw on Monday with CIA Director William Burns and Qatari Prime Minister Athani. So the talks seem to be moving pretty well along. However, Hamas is insisting, that's Yahya Sinwar, is insisting that the negotiations should not resume until there is a pause. So he's calling for a pause first and then negotiations. And the Israelis are saying that negotiations should continue while the fighting is going on. Very hard to know whether this is just posturing and we'll have a pause within a couple of days, or whether there's a long way to go here. But the thing is, looks like it's been pretty well cooked at this point. The next thing in the news is a statement by the Defense Minister Gallant, who for the first time talked about the new operations that are going to be taking place, the new military operations, the shift from intensive fighting to a new framework, which he is calling a framework of differentiation. So what he said is, following the achievement in the north of the Gaza Strip, which is deepening every day, we will soon be able to start a differential combat plan. There will be places in the Gaza Strip where we will start working to restore the population under a different leadership, non-hostile elements, while in other places, intensive fighting will continue. As I said, this is all a direct quote. As I said, we have cross-stage goals, such as eliminating the Hamas leadership and denying its capabilities. Together with our partners, we are building the humanitarian ways that will operate in Gaza the day after, led by local officials who are not hostile to Israel. This is a very interesting statement, Gadi. What he's saying is that there is going to be not a switch from the stage of intensive fighting to one of targeted strikes that the Americans are calling for, but a kind of mix, where there'll be elements of the Gaza Strip that will be completely off limits to fighting, while intensive fighting will continue in others. It's kind of a hybrid plan. Now, this leads us to the third element in the news, and that's that this plan announced by Gallant received a very sharp reaction, or engendered a very sharp reaction from Finance Minister and Chairman of the Religious Zionist Party, that's Bezalel Smotrich. He rejected the proposals to allow the Palestinian Authority officials to be involved in ruling the Gaza Strip after the war, and any decision to let Palestinians return to the northern Gaza Strip at this stage of the war. He put out a statement saying that he basically intimating that he would quit the government if such arrangements were made. And he maintained that previous policies toward Gaza, which he asserts that his party was forced to agree to, resulted in the October 7th atrocities. He is, of course, referring to Prime Minister Netanyahu's previous policy of containing Hamas in the coastal enclave of Gaza and doing economic deals with it. Quote, the efforts to determine these arrangements in a one-sided manner and by circumventing deliberations in the Security Cabinet with all the coalition parties won't work, said Smotrich, and he's threatening to resign. So basically what he's saying here is that Gallant's new plan is going to insinuate, is going to return the population to the north, and it's going to insinuate elements of the Palestinian Authority into Gaza without the full agreement of the Security Cabinet, of which he is a part, and this is a problem for Prime Minister Netanyahu. And I think this is the subject that we're going to be talking about now, Gadi.
Yeah, absolutely. And the simplest way to describe the bind is to say that there is pressure from the United States, which is very effective. It includes apparently threats to withhold ammunition, which we need, to withdraw the American veto from hostile decisions in the U.S. Security Council. And on the other hand, you have the right side of the coalition, which demands a more complete victory, and which does not even want to consider a return of anything that belongs to the Fatah, which is the Palestinian Authority is, of course, the Fatah, that any of these people will control the Gaza Strip as the Americans want, because according to Smotrich, and he has a point here, these people are terrorists in suits. They support the same thing. They teach their children the same thing, and they are training an army which may do the same thing from the Judea and Samaria that Hamas did from Gaza. There was also something I should mention in the margins of the news, because it was discussed here, exposed by Elchanan Gruner, the guy that we had on our first in-depth special. He exposed this, that there was an exercise by the IDF of a possible a terrorist attack on settlements in Judea and Samaria. And the cabinet asked that this exercise will include a joining of Palestinian Authority policemen who are actually soldiers joining Hamas in the attack. While what the army did is an exercise in which the Palestinian Authority works on the Israeli side against Hamas, which is the quintessential Oslo illusion. From the beginning of Oslo, the idea was that the Palestinian Authority is moderate and we can give it weapons so that it can root out Hamas terrorism. And now this is history, but we know that Arafat never moved seriously against Hamas, although Hamas moved against Fatah the minute they could in Gaza after they won the election. That, Mike, your guys in the White House and the Security Council forced Israel to include Hamas in, right?
Hamas. Oh, what you mean? You're talking about the election?
The elections of 2006.
I'm afraid I'm guilty of being part of that whole effort.
So you supported the inclusion of Hamas in the elections, or that was not your desk?
Okay, I would have to say yes, I did. If I can nuance it a little bit in that I was a very young and new recruit into the White House, and I did as I was told. I had in my heart of heart, I had reservations about that policy, but I didn't. I did not. I don't think I uttered any opposition to it. So that will be between me and the Lord on Judgment Day. There will be. I don't think anyone will find even an email from me saying this shouldn't. Maybe I may have sent an email or two saying what, but even
between you, the Lord, and our growing number of followers on this podcast, Mike. I think we're around 12,000 now.
So are we at 12,000? Well, hello to all 12,000. Welcome. This is fantastic to have you here. Ariel Sharon was the prime minister at the time, and Sharon himself didn't really oppose it either.
Yeah.
He put up he raised it in a couple of conversations with the president. He raised some concerns about it, but more just kind of symbolic than a really strong opposition. What he did, which was actually pretty smart, I think, because he saw that the Americans were really eager to get the Israelis out of Gaza. So what he did is he did a deal with Bush, a quid pro quo, where he said, okay, we'll move out of Gaza, but you have to promise me that you have to give me a solemn and I think what he thought was kind of a binding promise that that the same thing would not happen on the West Bank. And so Bush sent a series of letters to Sharon in which he guaranteed that Israel would not be removed from quote unquote major settlement blocks.
Yeah.
Sharon then tried to get a clear definition of what major settlement block was, and that was never determined. But obviously, places like Ariel would be a major settlement block.
Yeah, and around Jerusalem, and around East Jerusalem and Ma'ale Adumim.
Ma'ale Adumim, Ariel, East Jerusalem. These are major settlement blocks. So yeah, obviously, but I saw how I was very influenced by that experience because when the Obama administration came in, the first thing they did was throw any of those commitments away. They didn't recognize them in any way. And in fact, the Bush administration itself didn't pass them in a kind of official way to the Obama administration. So those commitments just went up in smoke.
And here we are. So I described the bind.
I'm sorry. I want to make I want to make one more point about this, if I may, and then I want to add something to what you said a minute ago.
Yeah.
so the last thing about this is the enduring problem of Israel. It's which is how to translate its military power into lasting political benefits, or even to shape political outcomes. Israel time and again gives up tangible and irreversible, makes tangible and irreversible concessions in return for what are in essence pinky promises by the other side, and then those and including the United States here, and those evaporate, and Israel is left with the new reality. It can't the ratchet only moves one way. Israel can't move the ratchet the other way.
Yeah, and Netanyahu, I think, is aware of this more than other prime ministers, because he kept saying "Yitnu yekablu." If they give, they will get, and he tried to say that we need to get something tangible when we give something tangible. So I described the bind in very simplistic terms as a vice in which the coalition is caught. On the one hand, American pressure to move towards a solution that will enable Fatah to enter the Gaza Strip. On the other hand, the right side of the coalition, which does not want to see anything like the Fatah. Remember, Mike, that this is Netanyahu's true position. Netanyahu said time and again, I don't want to see the Fatah there. They are part of the problem, not part of the solution. But now let me add something to the fray, because I actually think that these pressure may result in an early election. And the reason is that it's not just Smotrich. The public on the right does not see the downscaled war goals as even remotely legitimate. And the public increasingly demands radical solutions. For instance, a complete emptying of the northern part of Gaza and resettling Jews there in order to create a situation in which the Palestinians lose something that they care about, something that the Muslim Brotherhood care about, is this losing land. They don't care much about losing lives. As we see, they use their population as human shields. But there is an increasing demand from the Israeli public, and especially we hear this from the soldiers who are endangering themselves, saying, we are not going to go halfway. There's no such option for the government.
That was the other thing I wanted to mention. When you mentioned Smotrich's position, you said that you said that he doesn't trust the Palestinian Authority and doesn't want to see the Palestinian Authority back there. But it's more than that. It's also what you just said. He wants to see. I'm assuming, I haven't followed his every statement, but given that he is from the religious Zionist party, he wants to see a reestablishment of Jewish settlements there, which is which would immediately, if the Israelis were to do that, if the Netanyahu government were to do that, that would be an immediate crisis in relations with the United States. And so the tightrope that Netanyahu is walking is maintaining American support while going after Hamas, but also keeping his coalition together, because Smotrich and Ben Gvir and maybe others would leave if he brings in the Palestinian Authority. And the whole Galant plan, which I assume was developed so that the military in negotiation. This is the military negotiating with the Americans over military goals. And the Americans say, we want you to move from the stage of intensive combat to one of targeted strikes. And so they said, well, how about we do an intermediate phase where we continue intensive combat activities in some areas and only do targeted strikes in others, and then make other areas completely off limits to military action. And we start bringing and we start allowing Gazans to return to their homes or to those areas. So from a military point of view, it makes a lot of sense in terms of balancing the demands of the Americans, but it opens up the door to or it creates this day after dilemma for Netanyahu.
Yeah, and I think that the probable solution that they are feeling for is trying to stretch the time frame. This is the idea of differential fighting. And you said this on our most recent episode. You said that this is going to peter out for maybe a whole year. So
This is going to go on for a year. Yeah.
So what Netanyahu is thinking, I believe, is that completing the war aims as they were defined in the beginning is going to be very difficult. So we need to push them to the long term rather than downscale them. So we need to downscale them in the near future, and then have some horizon of hope or of a more complete defeat of Hamas. Now, let me throw in another important thing, because this is what I've been saying on the Israeli media and in a coming piece, which I think I'll translate to English after it's published in Hebrew, is this is the Americans want to see this as a round of violence or a war within the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And this is really the first Iran-Israel war by proxy. Right. And I'm saying the first because I don't think one is even remotely going to be sufficient in Israel's long-term goals. So allow me to lay this out in a few sentences, because I've been saying this in catchphrases, and I think I mentioned it here too, that this war is like the Suez War. It's not like the War of Independence. The Suez War, I might mention, you wrote a book about. So I'm not
1956. Just so that we don't lose those 12,000 viewers we have who are not up on every Arab-Israeli war.
So you wrote a book about this war. So just in a few sentences, why don't you tell our audience what this war was about?
This war is my favorite Arab-Israeli crisis, and it was.
That's the one when you really want to fall asleep. That's the one you dream about. Yeah,
yeah. No, anyway, Israel teamed up. It's much more interesting than this, but and if you give me just two sentences, Israel teamed up with Britain and France to fight against Egypt. In its task in the war was to take over the Sinai. At the time, Gamal Abdel Nasser, the leader of Egypt, was playing the role of Iran. It was supporting forces all around the Middle East that were opposed to Israel and opposed to Western imperialism, and in particular to the British and the French. That's how the Israelis and the British and the French teamed up. And then Eisenhower, President Eisenhower, shut down the war. They surprised Eisenhower with this. He shut it down in the middle. He forced the British and the French to evacuate immediately, and he forced the Israelis over a period of about 4 or 5 months to evacuate the Sinai, and gave them nothing in return. That's another case where Israeli military action did not change the political balance in any way.
So I dare to challenge you on this, and I'll say, and I'll look at it from another angle. In 1955, Nasser enjoyed what is called the Czechoslovakian weapons deal, which was really a Soviet supply of arms. And Ben-Gurion's strategic thought was that this upset the balance of power. And Nasser, as you said, was trying to create a noose around Israel's neck by surrounding it with enemies and uniting the Arab world under his radical leadership. So the 1956 war ended up with us giving up Sinai, but it also ended with 10 years of peace, or not peace, but equilibrium, to build and strengthen our state. And it was a major hit on the Egyptian army. Why am I mentioning this? Because this was only round one in a series of 4 wars, at the end of after which in 1977 Begin rose to power, and in 1979 the ring that was to strangle Israel collapsed, because it's, you don't like me calling it a linchpin, the cornerstone of what built around Israel.
The problem is the mixed metaphors. You've got nooses and cornerstones and linchpins all together. That's the problem.
But you know what I mean. What I mean is, they took the major power out of the ring that was supposed to strangle Israel. So it took 24 years from the Czechoslovakian weapons deal until the peace with Egypt that ring collapsed. Now Iran is building a ring around Israel. Hamas in the southwest, the Houthis down south, to our east, Iraq, and Syria to our northeast, and to our north, the strongest proxy, Hezbollah. So we are now fighting the weakest link in this ring, and Israel must think of it as the first round in an attempt to prevent Iranian hegemony. So I'll end with saying that this is the first Israeli-Iranian war by proxy, but it's only the first. So if Netanyahu now redefines the goal of this war, but remains focused on the horizon, and in some way portrays to the Israeli public a strategy that that would somehow promise that without upsetting the relations with America too much, that's impossible in a strict sense. Then I think that this is the first notch in an attempt to redefine the conflict, if that makes sense.
What is the first notch?
The redefinition of the war aims. Israeli expectations was that we will go in, smash Hamas, bring the hostages back, because this is how the war aims were defined. And that's not going to happen.
But I'm in total agreement with almost everything you're saying. By the way, just the professor in me, I can't believe I said that, but I was a professor once. Why not say 5 conflicts? The 48 war as well was an Egyptian-Israeli conflict. So no, let's not get lost in it, because the big point. I got the big point. So, but who there? I don't see any effort by the Israelis to redefine it. I mean, this may be in Netanyahu's head, but to actually start arguing that, and he has made some public statements that this is Iran is out there. But if he starts saying that this is a conflict with Iran, then he gets into a big conflict with Biden, who has defined it as Hamas, not Iran.
But this is why I said it's the first notch. And remember that when Biden was here, Israel wanted the joint statement to say that Iran is also behind this. And you would be shocked, Mike, the Americans did not agree.
Not only that, the Israelis. So part of the reason that Biden came to Israel, and this has not been well reported it hasn't been well reported anywhere, but there's more information about it in the Israeli press than in the American, is that the Israelis had a plan, Gallant had a plan to go after Hezbollah first. And the Americans came in and shut it down. So the Americans had directed the Israelis to Hamas, and they have protected. We've talked about this. I think they have protected Hamas. We're going to talk. We should talk a little bit today about the whole Hochstein plan, because this is what it's all about. In fact, maybe we should go to it now. What do you think?
Yeah, and Operation Prosperity will be deferred.
The third, and they're all related, actually. So
let's try to do both. And I just want if we are being professors, as a footnote with a reference to reading, let me.
I
actually wrote about this in a piece called Biden's 3 No's on Tablet, and we'll put a link to that piece under the video.
Okay, absolutely. So Amos Hochstein has been quietly carrying out I think one of the most important diplomatic initiatives of the Americans during the war, which is to cut a deal with between Israel and Lebanon that is designed to push Hezbollah back from the Israeli border. And it's not going to work. It's not going to work because it is based on the same logic by which there was an attempt to bring calm to Gaza. That is, the theory goes like this, that that the Lebanese economy is in crisis. The Lebanese state is in crisis. Hezbollah wants to pose as the savior of Lebanon. And so what will the American diplomacy will come in and will give it a small but very symbolically significant win against Israel by getting the Israelis to give up some territory that Hezbollah claims. This is the Har Dov. You call it Har Dov, or they call it Sheba Farms. So Sheba Farms and half of the town of Rajar are under control of Israel, and Hezbollah says it's Lebanese. So Israel will pull back from those areas, and in return, Hezbollah will agree to move 5-7 kilometers from the border. And the Americans will orchestrate and the Americans and the French will orchestrate lots of economic investment in Lebanon that will benefit the Lebanese and, of course, Hezbollah. And this will create peace between Israel and Lebanon. This, of course, will not work for reasons I hope we don't have to go into, but basically because Hezbollah's whole raison d'etre is to be opposed to Israel. But the mere fact that the Americans are saying to the Israelis, there is a diplomatic solution to this problem, is a way of putting Hezbollah under their protective umbrella. If the Israelis heat up the border against, if they try to escalate on the border against Hezbollah, then they will be accused by the Americans of scuttling this very promising diplomatic initiative, which is dangerous.
Let me say something. Let me say something. One more stream. As a footnote to this, Mike, is because I've been putting it in blunter terms. The United States is protecting its regional integration policy, the appeasement of Iran. It must therefore define the war as a conflict between Israel and the Palestinians so that it doesn't turn into a regional war starting with Hezbollah. If there is a war with Hezbollah, then the regional integration, the appeasement of Iran would just, for the whole world to see, would just collapse on the world stage. So this is why they came
absolutely
to deter Israel, not to deter Hezbollah. Or not just.
Yeah, absolutely. It can be both at the same time, but the deterrence of Israel is very important because they're simultaneously, the Americans are saying to the Iranians, you see, if you and us work together, we can stabilize all of these areas, and the United States will help you protect your equities, your interests. And you have a major interest in Lebanon. We can help you protect it and grow it. That's the unspoken message here.
Yeah, which is terrifying. And so is the message the same towards the Houthis in the south?
Absolutely the same. And this whole armada that the Americans have put together, which they are calling Prosperity Guardian, is so the Houthis have shut down global trade. 12% of the entire trade in the world goes through the Suez Canal, and the Houthis have shut it down. When we say the Houthis, the Iranians have shut it down. And so the American response is to put together this armada, which, if you see the pictures of it, it looks very impressive. Again, it's kind of like Joe Biden coming to Israel and saying, if you're thinking, to all those out there who are thinking of exploiting this conflict, don't. And he looks like Clint Eastwood saying, make my day, punk. Go ahead, make my day. But if you look, there's a number of things that are wrong with Prosperity Guardian. It is a completely defensive. Now, the number one thing is it is a completely defensive operation. So it is once again missile defense, a huge armada of missile defense to shoot down everything that the Houthis are going to shoot at Israel, but nothing not directed at the Houthis themselves. Of course, all the newspaper articles are saying that the White House is weighing strikes against the Houthis, but that's what it always does when it wants to give the impression that it's carrying out offense when it's really playing defense. This is purely defensive. So The problem with it is that you cannot counter an offensive military regime, which Iran and its proxies have set up with these missiles and drones and ballistic missiles, with purely defensive measures. It doesn't work. So that's point number one. Point number two, they're not striking Iran itself. They are Iran. They're to the extent that they're going after anything, and they're not, as I said, because it's purely defensive. They are only going after the Houthis. So the American policy with regard to all of Iran's different arms of this Iranian octopus is always to go after the puppet rather than the puppeteer. So there's no threat to Iran to Iran itself. And finally, I would just note that there are no regional states involved in this armada. Only the Bahrainis are the only ones, and they're there because the American fleet in the Persian Gulf. I'm sorry, we say the Arab Gulf in the American government. In the Gulf, the headquarters of the American fleet is in Bahrain. So the Bahrainis have to be involved in this, but nobody else is. The Saudis aren't there, and the Saudis are making noise against it. Why? Because they know that when this whole thing ends, the United States is going to, the Biden administration is going to be trying to make nice with Iran again. And any state, any local state that participated in this armada against Iran's interests is going to be held responsible. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So we've managed to cover both, and I think, if I might say, that you explained it with great clarity. I'll try to cut a clip from that and put on social media. And now we reach the dumbest take on the news. Shall I start this time?
Yeah, sure.
So it's not really the dumbest take on the news, but it's one of the funniest. So I'll be screening this without sound, and I'll tell you what it is. It looks like a WhatsApp group, but it's a WhatsApp group of Hezbollah, Hamas, and all these names are the Hebrew members of Hezbollah, all the heads of Hezbollah, and they're discussing how to attack Israel. So they're saying, shall we start? But how can we win against the Zionists? And say, oh, it's not a problem because the Zionist army is collapsing, and they're bringing things from the struggle against the reform for Israelis, saying that they will not go to do their
the judicial reform.
Those refuseniks of the military service during the struggle over the reform, who said, Israel, if you continue with this reform, you will not have an air force, and the reserve soldiers will not come to war. And then I can move it forward. And then
Amos Yadlin.
That was Amos Yadlin. I explained he was the chief of intelligence here. And then these heads of Hamas in their WhatsApp group ask, well, what if Israel expects us? And then they bring Amos Yadlin saying, oh, don't worry, Hamas is not going to attack. They're deterred for years ahead, and don't worry. And so it's like it's been constructed very wisely to show the irrelevance and stupidity in the way Israel behaved before it was struck by Hamas. So it's making the rounds on Israel's social media, and if you understand Hebrew, it's very funny.
Well, it's a defense of Netanyahu, because the left is trying now to put all of the responsibility for October 7th on the shoulders of Netanyahu.
You know, no one buys this because there is a clip of Mash'al. I think it's Mash'al, and it's at the end of this video is a clip of Mash'al saying, "Yeah, we thought it was a good time to attack because we saw the Israeli reservists are not coming to their reserve duty, and the army was collapsing," or something to that effect. And you know, nobody, the press is all behind the campaign to single out Netanyahu and blame no one else. But who's going to buy that?
Yeah, I can't see how that'll possibly work. Well, listen, my dumbest take, it doesn't seem so dumb anymore now. It relates directly to what we were talking about
It's a
before.
dumb take that aged well, you say?
Well, no, it just seemed when I read it, I went, oh, this is anyway. No, but after our discussion, you'll see what I'm talking about here. Let me just this is from the former head of the Mossad, Yossi Cohen, and he gave a talk to a bunch of business leaders, and he's talking about who should rule the Gaza Strip on the day after, and he said the following. We need to form an inter-Arab coalition with European support that will enable the right forces, including the Palestinian Authority, to return to the Gaza Strip as we wanted in the past. In fact, there were attempts to return the Palestinian Authority to Gaza after Hamas seized control there in 2007. Abu Mazen apparently wasn't capable of it. But I think that we have to create mechanisms that produce a horizon at which not everything will be on the IDF's shoulders. The destruction in the Gaza Strip requires reconstruction amounting to hundreds of billions of dollars, and Israel has neither the ability nor the will to take that on. Israel will not provide supplies for 2.3 million Gazans. We mustn't get into that corner. We must co-opt Arab countries. The problem with this is the reason I find it so silly is that it's that he's looking at the bind that you and I described a minute ago, and he's come up with this magic solution, the revitalized Palestinian Authority, together with the Europeans, together with the Arab countries, and he thinks that somehow that Israel is going to maintain control of this process. Once what the enemies of Israel, let's just say the critics of Israel in Europe and the United States want to do is they want to internationalize the Gaza Strip. They want to internationalize the West Bank, and they are in the very process of which we just described a minute ago of internationalizing Lebanon. This doesn't make it easier for Israel to look after its interests. It makes it harder because what happens is you get, just like is developing in Lebanon under the Biden administration, is you get an international defense, an umbrella under which groups like Hezbollah and Hamas are able to thrive. So these guys are tactically, they're very clever, but I think strategically they're missing the picture, which doesn't mean I'm necessarily in agreement with Smotrich, because some of what Cohen says here is right. You do need money, international investment, and so on. But there has to be a mechanism by which the IDF maintains control of this whole process. And what he's talking about is going to be the end of it.
Yeah, I think he's talking to the Americans. I think the Israeli public will have none of it and doesn't want to hear anything about it. And probably Yossi Cohen is maneuvering to present himself as a leader and may be making a mistake here, because sometimes Israelis miscalculate and they think that being ingratiating yourself with the Americans is always the right move in Israeli politics. This time, it's just not the right move.
I got to say though that in the latest poll, which we discussed, Gantz was way up, Netanyahu was down, and Smotrich's party was not even passing the threshold to get into the Knesset. So
there are great problems with these polls. Is that their calculation of seats in the parliament doesn't include the indetermined, or so I heard from one analyst. And so there's a whole block of 20 seats that's out of the picture, and they just stretch the rest. So we don't know what is really going on. And I think your analysis last time was actually very good, because this picture is confusing. And people say, oh, so Israel is moving to the left, but no, Israel is moving to the right. And what Amit Segal, one of your favorite commentators here, said is that if you want to crystallize what the Israeli electorate, the way the Israeli electorate moved, you would have to say that it moved to the right, but it doesn't like the existing right-wing parties, and any new right-wing party that would seem decent now will be able to sweep the vote. But that's an intelligent guess, but we don't know. And that's all the time we have for today. So Mike, any last word? You want to say something before
I just I'm just saying that the pressures that are on Netanyahu right now, and not just Netanyahu the man, but anyone who would sit in his seat and has to balance the demands of the religious Zionists, the demands of the IDF with the demands of the international community, and also look after his own party interests, the demands of the Israeli public, all of those. That is that uneasy lies the head that wears the crown, said Shakespeare.
Yeah. It's you need a Bismarck or a Kissinger to juggle all these balls. And Netanyahu is actually probably more capable than anyone else in Israel of balancing these balls, if it is at all possible. So that's all from us for today, and we will see you on our, shall we call it the weekend episode, Mike? It's the Sunday episode, actually. Why don't we?
It's an Israel update, so we'll see you at the beginning of next week.
So indeed,
did I tell you that Catholics make the same calculation as
Israelis about what?
As Jews?
As regarding what?
That actually, I wonder if does the week begin with Sunday, or does the week begin with Monday? Actually, I forget. I got confused. Forget what I just said. Catholics make the same calculation as Jews about when the day begins. The day begins at sunset.
It does.
Yeah. So I, as a Catholic, I can go to Mass on Saturday night. So I can go to Sunday Mass on Saturday night.
I didn't know that. So it's
they don't like
because our Shabbat begins with Friday, and so with this sermon we have to go. So we will see you
cutting my
at
sermon
the
off.
beginning or the end of the week, meaning on the coming Sunday. Thank you for watching.
You're cutting my sermon off.
Yeah,
you're cutting my sermon off. But no, it's a good thing you cut my sermon off, because I don't actually know what I'm talking about. So
so thank you for watching anyway.